Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I apologise in advance for my voice this morning. I have had man flu all week, which is well known as much worse than woman flu, so suffer more. So lower your expectations for this morning. And welcome to week 3 of our Christian homage to Game of Thrones. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Darren. And my job here at church is teaching people the Bible. And teaching people the Bible is difficult because the people I teach don't like difficulty. What I mean by that is that when I explain a certain passage in the Bible, there is often a clash between my explanation of the biblical text and your assumptions of what the biblical text is saying, assumptions that in most cases you've lived with your entire adult life. Now I say that to you because this morning we're going to carry on looking at a well-known biblical character called Solomon. And as we go through this process, I would like you to be a little bit aware of your assumptions. And of course, the better known the biblical characters are, the deeper those assumptions tend to be. So what do we know about Solomon? What assumptions do we bring to this part of the Bible this morning? Well, we know that Solomon was wise. This is traditionally what he's best known for. We know that he was very successful, very wealthy. And we also know that he was profoundly spiritual. And those assumptions, I think, for the most part, are grounded in truth. For example, ancient literature is replete with references to the wisdom of Solomon. It is a historical and archaeological fact that under his tenure, the economy of ancient Israel was booming. And we also know that he wrote some really great parts of the Bible. In fact, some of my favourite scriptures were written by Solomon. So I'm a big Solomon fan, actually. He was wise, he was successful, he was spiritual. What's not to like? This morning, however, we're going to look at his wisdom and his success and his spirituality in relation to the complexities of his character. It's very easy to think about faith as being linear, right? So there was a time when I wasn't a Christian and everything was bad, and then I became a Christian and everything started to get better. And then I started to read my Bible, and I started to do what the Bible said. My life from that point on was just onwards and upwards. There was just this steady, one-way progress in my life from not so good to great, all because of my faith. So if we were to draw a graph of our faith, it would look something like this, more or less headed in one direction. Now, I would suggest that life is not like this. I would suggest that if you and I ever walk through the pearly gates, we will do so having taken a very circuitous route that has had as many downs as it has ups, as many failures as it has successes. And here's why this matters. If you drink the Kool-Aid of the Christian church that suggests to you that the more you believe, the better you will be, sooner or later, that unbiblical delusion will bump into the realities of life, and you will lose whatever faith you once had. Here's the problem of the Solomon story, and it is also the problem of us. He was obedient to God. And he wasn't. He was extremely principled and moral, and extremely devious and immoral. He was very right on many issues, and very wrong on many issues also. His story, like our story, like the characters in Game of Thrones that we love so much, was full of ambiguity. And this is why his story must be told. If you're ready then, for this we will begin. For those of you joining us online, welcome to you. I hope you're having a good long weekend. you lazy dogs. We're in the first book of the Kings, chapter 3 and verse 1, where we read that Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. Now, this sentence is dripping with good advice, because it always makes sense, doesn't it, to make an alliance in your career, in your business. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Friendships, relationships, contacts, they are everything these days. The greater your network is, the greater your chance of success will be. And in this particular sentence, Solomon is exponentially increasing his chances of success because he's making a friendship with a person who has hitherto been his main competitor. And that just makes good sense. If I can make money out of being in business with you, rather than losing money by being in competition against you, then that's great. However, to its original audience, this sentence would have sent a shiver down their spines, because in the Bible, Egypt always has a negative resonance. Egypt is the archetypical enemy, the archetypical oppressor, the archetypical group of persons whom you want nothing to do with. Specifically, the Bible warns against marrying people like this, because from the perspective of the Bible, foreign women have foreign ways, and some of their foreign ways are not so good. So on a business level, this sentence makes perfect sense. On a biblical level, this sentence strikes a worrying chord. He is getting in bed with the wrong people. Anyway, that aside, he brought this person to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. So, what you're meant to think when you read that sentence is that these are the good times. There's a ton of construction going on. You just know there's Italians involved somewhere. Someone is getting ceramic somewhere. And this is fantastic. The king is making money. The people are making money. It's good for him. It's good for them. It's good for everyone. Things are so good, in fact, they're even getting, notice what it says, a wall. If you lived in the ancient world and you had a wall, that was a sign that you had really arrived, that you'd really made it, that you were doing really well, right? So I've got the 2,600 square feet. I've got the marble countertop. I've got the hardwood floor. I've got the 65-inch television, and my car was made by people who don't speak English, right? This is the assumption. Because I'm doing well, that therefore means I'm doing well. And that assumption is propagated still by some of the preachers that you perhaps listen to on television. If everything is going great, that therefore means you must be on the right track. God has blessed you. It's a very naive thought, but a very appealing one. Next sentence. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places, because a temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Now, in the ancient Near East, gods were thought to live predominantly on the tops of mountains and hills, and so therefore, on the top of any significant hill in the ancient Near East, there was some shrine dedicated to some kind of god. And because there were so many gods in that part of the world, most of these shrines were a wee bit mixed, a bit hybrid, a bit, they celebrate all sorts of gods in the same places. And for that reason, the writer of the Book of Kings never, ever, ever has anything positive to say about the high places. When he uses this phrase, high places, he is using it negatively. So here's a contradiction. On the one hand, Solomon is going to a very dodgy place to have a very dodgy religious experience. No question. However, in the next sentence we are told that Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David. And what I want you to know at this point of the story is that Solomon is the only king in Kings who was ever said to have had a love for God. And when the writer of the Book of Kings uses this word love, he uses it in a very specific way. We know that this author was heavily influenced by the person who wrote the Jewish Torah. And we know that the person who wrote the Jewish Torah always used the word love in such a way that implied a moral and a ethical commitment to the teachings of the Bible. So here's the classic text from the Torah. It says this, you've no doubt remember it when you had to learn it at Sunday school. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. This is a huge ethical, moral verse in the Bible. It's part of the Jewish Shema. Even today, Jews pray this prayer twice a day, and it answers the question that we all ask. What kind of man do I need to be today? What kind of person do I need to be as I interact with my family and with my colleagues and so on and so forth? Well, here's the answer. I need to be the kind of person who loves God, morally, ethically, religiously, with all of my heart, with all of my soul, with all of my strength. In other words, if I can paraphrase the pop song, all of me must be committed to all of him. This is what the writer means, the writer of the Torah means, when he talks about loving God. All of me must be committed to all of him. And we are told that Solomon was like this. We are told, in other words, that his faith in God was genuine, it was absolute, and it was complete. All of him was committed to all of God. Except, notice the word except. This is your word, this is my word. She's a good woman, except. He's really sincere about his Christianity, except. Really good in the workplace, except. Except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. So here's the contradiction. Live with it, accept it. He loved God, he didn't love God. He was sincere, he was insincere. He was a person with many admirable qualities and a person with many qualities that were less so. More contradictions. And I think they all force us to look inward. How can all of you be committed to all of him when there are areas of you, so many of them, that are not committed to all of him? This is the contradiction that we live with daily. Then the writer says that the king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. All the gods were there. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar. The animals always get it in the end. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." This is the religious equivalent of winning the lottery. God shows up and says, "Name it. What do you want? What do you need? I'll give it to you." Now, the writer of the Book of Kings is very, very clear on this point. The high places where Solomon currently is are always places of religious and moral dubiety, without question. Many of the things that you think happen in Toronto on a Saturday night did happen on the high places on a Sunday morning. And you get a little of that in this sentence. Notice, as I said, there were 1,000 animals on the altar. Well, that takes time. And in the cultures of the East, religious festivals that take time tend to be quite raucous. So notice that during this particular religious festival, Solomon is sleeping. We know from other parts of the Bible that Solomon was a bit of a player. He liked to party and party hard. And in this sentence, at least at the start of it, he's partied out. He's lying, no doubt, on some silken bed with a belly full of wine, certainly with his arm draped around some woman or other. And in that context, God speaks to him. And I hope you find that encouraging. It is often not in the place of morality and decency that we encounter something significant of God and of faith. It is often in the place of immorality and indecency that we make significant progress and encounter something of the God who loves us. There are, after all, no godless places on this earth. Then Solomon answered, obsequiously, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David." Why? "Because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day." So notice again, this is the theology of television. And it is a theology most loved by people, I think, who love the wrong things. Solomon is doing well, really well. And the reason he's doing well, apparently, isn't because of his significant business savvy, or because of his utter ruthlessness, and because of his willingness to crush the competition without mercy. He's doing well, according to him, because his father David was a good man and faithful to God. Now, we've read the David story, so we know a little bit more than this. We know that although the basic orientation of David's life was decent and was pointed towards God, there were many other aspects of his life that demonstrated a situational morality, if I can put it that way. However, this is the official line, and we'll stick to it. The reason I'm doing well, God, the reason I'm successful, the reason I have a wall, is because my father was a good man. And I want to be a good man as well. Next sentence. "You have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I'm only a little child, and I do not know how to carry out my duties." So this is good. This is progress. This is almost Shakespearean. The fool thinks himself wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. So he seems to be saying here, "God, I know I've gotten it wrong. I know I've made some mistakes." Maybe he feels bad about what he did last week. Maybe he feels bad about the people he murdered. Maybe he feels bad about the relationship he got into with Egypt. Maybe he feels bad about all the stuff he's been doing on the high places and all that stuff. I don't know. So he's like, "God, things have been good for me. I've had this really successful streak, but I get a sense that things could be better. So much better. There's so much further I have yet to go." And so he says, "I'm here among people you've chosen, a great people. Too numerous to count or number. In other words, there's huge challenges ahead of me. I don't know what they are yet, but I want to be fit to meet them. So give your servant a discerning heart." Now, this is nice. The phrase "discerning heart" literally means in Hebrew the heart that hears, the heart that listens. The idea being that those who really obey are those who have really heard. And this is such a beautiful sentiment, I think. A sentiment that we can take not only into our relationship with God, but into our relationships with other people. For example, with our spouse. I want to really hear you. I want to really hear you. And the reason I want to really hear you is so that I can really know how it is I can please you. And I want to know how I can really please you so that I can really please you. And this spiritually is where Solomon is coming from. I want to really hear your heart, God. Because I want to really know what you want. Because I really want to know how to live. It's nice. Now at this point, I'm wondering, cynical as I am, I'm wondering what God thinks of this guy. And I'm wondering with good reason. Last week he murdered his half-brother and a couple of old-age pensioners. This week he made an alliance with a person whom his faith regards as repugnant, and he's been going to dodgy places to have dodgy religious experiences. So I'm legitimately, I think, wondering what God thinks of this slightly dubious individual. Surprisingly, I am told, we are told, the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So here's the conundrum in the Bible, and it is a moral conundrum. God is looking at this guy whom we rightly regard as being slightly objectionable, and God says, I like you. I hope you find that encouraging as well. You know, and he doesn't even mention some of the dodgy stuff he's done. God's not like, you know, I'd like to have a conversation with you about what happened last week. I'd like to have a conversation with you about the mistakes you've thus far made. I want to have a conversation with you about this, about that. God just says, right here, right now, in this place, I like you. You're on the right track. This is good. And it's troubling, because this isn't a good man. This is a man who's done more wrong in the past 2 weeks than we would think of doing in an entire lifetime. Anyway, so God says to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies. I've been watching, and it seems you have that covered yourself. I will do what you have asked. I will give to you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. I like that, by the way. There's never been anyone like you, and there never will be. And I really like the next bit. So do you. Moreover, I will give to you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as your father David did, I will give you a long life. So that's that. And then what you basically get in the Bible is page after page after page after page of how wise Solomon was and how wealthy Solomon became. Like the next 10 pages of the Bible are basically about that. Solomon was really wise, really wealthy. Really wise, really wealthy. Everyone loved him, everyone was impressed because he was really wise and really wealthy. And it's all legit, absolutely legit. All over the ancient world, people spoke about how clever Solomon was. They spoke about the buildings he designed, the gardens he planted, the businesses he grew. He published books, he wrote poems. Everyone loved Solomon. He made lots of friends, never had any enemies. He was the all-round good guy, hail fellow, well met. He was wise, he was successful. He was wise, he was successful. 3,000 years later, I still read some of the poetry that Solomon wrote, and I still find it profoundly insightful. But throughout all those pages of the Bible that talk about how wise and successful he was, there is a hint, and not too subtle a one neither, that all was not quite well in Solomon's soul. Let me fast forward to the last chapter of his story in the Bible, and his faults and frailties are laid bare. So let's skip to that now. Having spent ages telling us of his phenomenal success and cleverness, the story then says that King Solomon, however, again a word that describes you and me, however, spent loads of pages saying about, you know, the good things you've done and the good person you are. However, he loved many foreign women, besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. Well, what's wrong with that? Foreign women, after all, are interesting. Their skin is dark, their skills are exotic, particularly Sidonians. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal, the writer says, is that these people were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. So the writer of the Bible knows what you and I know. He knows that if you marry a person thinking that you are going to change them, you're in for a very rude awakening. In reality, it's going to be the other way around. They're going to change you, and sometimes not for the better. And for the writer of the story, this is a huge negative. In a polytheistic environment, the people of Israel were supposed to be unique in that they followed and believed in just one God. And so it was very important to their culture, to their ethnicity, to their identity, to separate themselves from all these other nations. And a key part of that separation was you must not marry these people, you must not marry them, you must not date them, you must not get involved with them, because they will change you, they will dilute your ethnic culture. So, marrying foreigners taboo, because foreigners have foreign ways. Nevertheless, the writer says, positively, I think, that Solomon held fast to them in love. Now, we have read the word love before. Remember I said to you that Solomon loved God, that he was in fact the only king in Kings who was said to have done so, and that for the writer of Kings, loving God meant being committed to him morally and ethically. However, now the writer says that that situation was muddied by his love, genuine love, for his foreign women. And the emphasis is on the word all, because we're then told that he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives and women led him astray. We know from some of the things that Solomon wrote that he was quite, he often felt quite low about life, quite empty, and so he tried to fill the void by doing various experiments. And one of the experiments he did throughout his life was by looking for meaning in love, by looking for completeness in the arms of other people. I don't think his experiments quite worked out, but that's what he did. Then we're told that as Solomon grew old, and you might rightly wonder, surprised he managed to grow old with all his women, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord as the heart of his father David had been. And then the writer goes on to say that he in fact built temples to some of these other gods, and the writer of the Bible is horrified by this. And I think this sentence perfectly reflects the tension of the Christian life. On the one hand, we are very sincere in our beliefs. Of course we are. There is a side to us, genuine side, that wants to believe the right stuff and to live in the right way. We quite sincerely want to know what the Bible says and want to do what the Bible says. Absolutely. However, on the other hand, there is another side to us that is equally genuine and equally real. We are often situational in our morality. We pay lip service to God, but in reality live for other things, money, pleasure, and so on and so forth. There are areas of our lives in which God is not permitted. And that is why I find a resonance with Game of Thrones, for example. I relate to people whose stories are ambiguous, who are both good and bad in the same person. That is why the story of Solomon is so applicable to us, because we too are ambiguous. We just are. We don't like to think of ourselves this way, but it's true. We are ambiguous people, all of us, and we always will be. Then we read that the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is your attitude," I was quite upset to read that this week. It seems God can get mad at us because of our attitude. That was bad news to me. Anyway, excuse me. "And you've not kept my covenant and decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." Now, that's, and then Solomon dies and that's it and everything falls apart. So what do we, okay, I've finished now, and then I'll wrap up and we can have questions. Now, it's quite rare in church these days to look at stories in the Old Testament. It just is. And I think I know why. It's got something to do with the fact the stories in the Old Testament don't land easily in our lives. They don't give us a neat theology or a pre-packaged wisdom that slots easily into the workplace or the marriage. They don't necessarily teach us how to be better people and so on. They're just complicated and ambiguous and blah, there it is. Deal with it. But it's the Bible. So it's important that we look at them. But having looked at them, what do we do with this information, with this ambiguous character who was good and bad, moral and immoral, admirable and not so much? Well, I think we have options, which is always good. We could say something like this. we could say Solomon was a dysfunctional character whose life was full of complexities. But God still liked him and was happy to use him. So as you deal with your dysfunctions, as you cope with the complexities of your situation, take that to heart and run with it. God knows about the dysfunction, he knows about the complexities, but he still likes you. And he's happy to use you. And that would be a very fair handling of the text. Also, we could say that Solomon's life had lots of dysfunction and lots of complexity. And those complexities had consequences. God, at the end of the day, it seems, did not overlook the divisions within his own heart. And he punished them for them. So, as you bear with your dysfunctions and your complexities, please remember that actions and behaviour always lead to consequences. That would be a fair handling of the text as well. It's always a mistake to think that you're going to be the exception to the rule. That's just me. Also, we could say, indeed I think we must say, that ambiguity is normal. It is expected. The sacred texts of our faith never ever expect us to be anything, well, ideally they would like us to be unambiguous, but they expect that we won't be. And so we can say that the ignominious incidents of your life, and there surely have been a few, those incidents, however cringeworthy, do not define you as a person. There is more to you than your failure. There is more to you than the embarrassment, than the darkness, than the slip-ups. That one thing happened, those 10 things happened. Yes, it's true, but that's not your whole story. There is more to you than that. It is also true that your goodness and your morality and the high points of your life don't define you either. Those things are true. They all are. But there's more to your story than that also. You are complex. And complexity is an accepted part of the Christian life. You'll remember that the Apostle Paul himself spoke about how he had this struggle between the person he wanted to be and the person he often ended up being. And that too would be a fair handling of the text. Also, I think we could say, is it nice to get a multiple choice application? So take whichever one you like and run with it. I'm trying so hard to please you. We could say that a sure way to damage yourself from the perspective of the Bible would be to, step one, leave yourself wiggle room in your commitment with God, like Solomon did. Love him with part of who you are, but exclude him from large parts of who you are. Step two would be to assume that you are an exception to the rule. I know God has said this about this situation, but I'll get away with it. And step three would be to ignore your weakness. Ignore what in your heart of hearts you know is going to ruin you in the end. So take whichever application you like. Any questions on any of that? I know it's dark and dirty, but this is medicine. Any questions? Yes? So the question is, who wrote the Book of Kings? Can I ask why you ask the question? Okay. Well, knowledge is an end in itself, so good. I ask why you ask because whoever it was seems to have not liked Solomon very much. He seems to have been quite willing to point out his faults and his failings. The reason for that is because the book of 1st and 2nd Kings in 1st and 2nd Samuel, were written at the end of Israel. So they were written at a time when Israel had fallen apart, when the people of Israel had been taken into captivity by the Babylonians, and so on and so forth. And so the theologians are sitting in the ruins of their city, and they're trying to figure out what went wrong. How did all this happen? And so they begin in the story, here's how it went wrong. Because our kings were not good, our kings were not faithful. Who wrote it? It was, well, we don't know who. It was probably written by a group of people who were influenced heavily by the Torah. Some people, in fact, think that the Torah and the writers of 1st and 2nd Kings were the same people. But certainly they were heavily, I don't know, I think of that, but they were certainly heavily influenced by the Torah. So it was written by a group of religious people who didn't like the leaders of their society. So they had an agenda, an animus. But isn't it wonderful that all of that ended up being in the same Bible? So in the same Bible you have a book that lays bare Solomon's faults and failings and weaknesses and dirtiness and peccadillos. Like it's all there for people to read to the end of time. And yet in that same book there's a book like Ecclesiastes, which was written by Solomon, which talks about his journey through life and his wisdom and what he's learned. And they're both there. And I love that about our faith. Here is the faults of this man, the failings of this man. He was a man just like you and me, but he also had some great stuff to say. And God was happy that he said that stuff and used it and so on and so forth. I find that far more helpful than a book that would obviously be spun. Like if I read a book about a person and it's all about how wonderful they are, it doesn't mean anything to me, because I know there's something hidden. Good question. Great question. Short answer. Now I'll expand on that. So the form of the Bible that we have, it's theologians call it the canon of Scripture. I don't know why. Maybe some big guns in the church thought of it. So there's this list of books, and so the question in antiquity was which books are in and which books are out. So by the time of the New Testament, the approved list of Old Testament scriptures was more or less already decided upon. So the Bible that Jesus read would have been our Old Testament. That's just a historical fact. It's completely undisputed. The earliest full manuscripts that exist come from long before the time of Jesus, and they're almost identical to later manuscripts. So that's a fact. Then in the New Testament period, there's these new books, these new letters, these new Gospels, and this list was formally decided upon, I think, in about 413, 414 AD. However, that list is almost identical to earlier lists that come from the early part of the 2nd century, so about 125 AD. So within 100 years of Jesus' death, the list of books in the Bible was identical to the list that we have today, and that list is closed. And it's important to know that it's closed, so if you ever look on the Discovery Channel or the History Channel, which seems pretty unhistorical these days, and newsflash, some Gospel of Dave was found in the desert that says Jesus was married to a checkout operator in Zares. This proves that you don't buy that. The list is closed. It's full. It's complete. In terms of the Bible being a story. Yes, I think the best way to understand the Bible is as a story. It's called narrative theology. So we take this book and we read it as a story and try to understand, what is this story telling us? The story in a nutshell is the restoration of paradise. We begin at the beginning in paradise, we end at the end in paradise, and the whole story is about paradise being restored. And that's why the story is often so dark and dirty. Restoration is dark and dirty. It involves getting rid of rot and filth and mould and dealing with unpleasant things. No, but my next session is going to be the Gospel according to Days of Our Lives. and then the young and the restless. Okay, I'm joking. But I did have that request. Can you do the young and the red? No, I can't. No, it's hard. Yes, I know. It's hard to know what the agenda. All books in the Bible are written with an agenda. They just are. Agenda is the wrong word. A purpose. So they're written to a specific audience, and if we can understand something of the audience and something of the purpose, it helps us understand the angle of why this was written, and who it was written to, and so on and so forth. And it changes our understanding, in fact. So, although that becomes extremely difficult when dealing with a few of those books. So, yes, the agenda of Kings and Chronicles is different. Thank you. Good question. Okay, that's it. Pray then go, fair enough. Our Father in heaven, we wish that our lives were less ambiguous, that our characters were less complex, but that is not the case. And so we come to you as we actually are, not as we would like to be or pretend to be. We come to you with our goodness and with our badness, with our morality and our immorality, with our desire to be good and with our shame where we have not been. And we ask again that you will have mercy upon us, and that you will empower us and strengthen us to live for you this week. Be with us in our struggle between the person we would desire to be and the person we would desire not to be. Be with us in our homes, in our workplaces, in our places of play. We ask this in Christ's name.